You might remember me covering a kickstarted point-and-click adventure headed up by a guy involved in some of the most well-received games in the genre. It went okay. I'm now here to talk to you about a completely different kickstarted point-and-click adventure headed up by a guy involved in some of the most well-received games in the genre. Thimbleweed Park comes from Ron Gilbert of Maniac Mansion, Monkey Island and Humongous Entertainment fame, along with Gary Winnick, who I honestly had to research for this, I didn't recognise the name. Turns out he had a hand in a fair few LucasArts games from 1984 to 1993 in art director, animator and project leader roles. Probably should have known all that already. Egg on my face, I guess. I feel like Thimbleweed Park explains itself in a single screenshot. Pixel art graphics, verb list, very reminiscent of Maniac Mansion. We're going old school here. That said, it's not entirely of that time. They haven't taken the lazy route and do bring a few new things to the table. I'll get the story out of the way first though, it won't take long. We open in 1987 against the backdrop of a giant ominous red thing, a gently jiggling padlock, and the murder of an innocent city limit sign. See, the pop number went down and everything. Sign murder. An Eastern European sounding man arrives for a meeting under a bridge, because that's where they hold meetings apparently. Not with the drunk hobo, it's someone far more stealthy than that. We get a few small interactions and puzzles to get us used to the interface, before Mr. Europe wanders further along the trail where something smacks his face and takes him out. Soon enough, the body is discovered. Enter agents Ray and Reyes, neither of which seem to be expecting the presence of the other, but nonetheless have both arrived to solve the murder and have a wee adventure which reminds me a hell of a lot of Twin Peaks for some reason. Small town, weird stuff happening, slightly offbeat locals, bit of a comedic tone, everyone appearing to have their own secret agenda, that kind of thing. Where Kathy Rain played all this for the serious, Thimbleweed Park includes comedy as well. This is Ron Gilbert we're talking about. There's even an option to choose which way toilet paper hangs, for God's sakes. I mean, there's only one right answer, but it's nice to let everyone else live their lie, I suppose. Now that whole, oh look a body thing might not seem like much of a setup, but it expands from there. For one thing, you start off with one playable protagonist for the prologue, the aforementioned European. Once the agents show up, then the game starts proper, that expands to 2. Before long, the game adds a couple of more of the town's residents to your playable roster. They're usually added after a small flashback chapter unique to that character. All of your playable peoples can talk to NPCs, and there's some unique dialogue depending on who's talking to who, but you generally don't have to ask the same questions of multiple characters. Considering you can't make the playable characters talk to one another, I can only assume they have a psychic connection of some kind. It's a bit weird to see all these characters run around not talking to each other and occasionally swapping items though. Personally, I'd rather not talk to every character multiple times when I've already seen what they've said, and I can't imagine an explanation for this hive mind situation that wouldn't sound like a hand wave. Better left unsaid, I reckon. On the other hand, you start to see where the game was reined in. Some of the item descriptions are the exact same line of dialogue said by a different voice actor, and I find it hard to believe they would describe some of these things in the exact same way. Now, whilst the characters may be of one mind, they are not necessarily of one purpose. Each character has goals and objectives unique to that character. I don't normally read other reviews until I've finished my own, but I somehow came across someone criticising Thimbleweed Park for the overwhelming number of goals it gives you. Now, I found that interesting because I've always had the opposite reaction to this sort of thing in adventure games. It's an extension of a design I first saw in Dave the Tentacle, but extends back to Maniac Mansion as well. You get stuck on one objective, you can work on another one instead. You might not even have to switch character, every one of them has multiple objectives. I understand that it might seem overwhelming, but if you can play something like the modern Fallout games and deal with the vast freedom those give you when you step outside the starting area, you can get the hang of this. More understandable when you realise you have a bunch of characters, a bunch of items, and you don't know which characters should use which items. And I know we have this old trope of try using everything on everything when stuck, but for me that's a backup method for which games aren't designed. Not that I'm saying you shouldn't do it if you are stuck, but I feel it's the last thing you should try, not the first. Thimbleweed Park tries to veer away from this in a few ways. There's certain items characters won't give away, for example, so you know they're the ones that have to use them. If you want the prime example though, it's in the mansion library, and I'm not even going to guess at the total number of books it has. If you want to find something in here, you need at least an inkling of an idea. Most of those books were named and written by the Kickstarter backers, by the way. That's pretty neat. We saw this technique in Resonance as well with the short-term memory system. Pretty much any object could be stored there and you could use the memory of it on something else. Again, make the options so broad that you need to apply at least a teeny morsel of logic. It's what the genre is built on after all. I would however be lying if I said I never used a walkthrough for this game. Once because I completely forgot about something I'd used earlier, and once because I hadn't spotted an item. And I'm not talking about the collectible specks of dust, which is literally a pixel hunt. It's only for completion purposes, that doesn't count, not required for completing the game. And even though I'm fairly sure it was patched in afterwards, you do get object highlighting by hitting the tab key. Nicely done. Anyway, taking a few notes is not the worst thing you could do while playing this. Probably my own fault for playing it on hard mode instead of casual. I wouldn't call hard mode unfairly difficult, but you're more than likely going to find that one puzzle that has you head desking for hours. Of course, this comes from a fairly seasoned point and clicker / somebody who's somehow completed a Space Quest game without a walkthrough at some point. Speaking of Sierra, they and their player killing ways get name checked a fair few times here, along with the LucasArts XP and various LucasArts titles attributed to said XP. It's reference AF up in here, with a light sprinkling of fourth wall breaks. They don't really let up on the meta dialogue, not even later on. It might seem blatantly self-referential, but I think they're actually trying to tell the player what type of game they're playing. Try anything, don't worry, you won't be punished for curiosity, you won't be made to reload or restart. I feel like they stopped short of don't claim on forums that the game is bugged just because you're stuck. Where I think they fell down on this, however, was having the solution to one of the puzzles require you to look on the internet for it. By that I mean I don't think there are any other clues in the game on how to solve this puzzle. So if you're playing without an internet connection, you're kinda fucked. In fact, I'm going to spoil it right now, so if you don't want to hear what it is, mute the video for 5 seconds. Use the balloon animal on the corpse. I get that they're keeping up the whole meta angle, I appreciate that. I'm just saying they might not have thought it all the way through. I'm going to go back to the interface for a minute, which is a reference in itself. Your classic Scum interface with a twist or two. First, the other characters are hidden up in this corner instead of in the inventory area. Second, the shortcut keys for verbs are now Q, W, E, A, S, D, Z, X, C to correspond to the grid of verbs on screen. Took me a while to get used to. Hell, it took me a while to figure out in the first place. But it definitely makes more sense, and the less movement my keyboard hand has to do, the better. And the last major departure from Scum is the ability to make characters run in a way that makes games footage look absolutely daft, either by double clicking the mouse button or holding it down and dragging. And if that's not fast enough for you, there's the option to travel by map. Once you find one. And then have every individual character go grab one. Individually. As well as aping an old interface, they're also sticking to an old art style. I like that they've taken a Wadget Eye approach to graphics, namely, take an old style almost verbatim, but multiply the number of different colours used by 16,777,216. Whereas Wadget Eye did that with the standard VGA look, Thimbleweed Park takes the art style of Maniac Mansion instead, which roughly translates to big pixel heads, but you'll never mistake it for something else, will you? And if you'll indulge me in one more bit of designer-focused guff, I'm way too tempted to refer to this as open world. Granted, it's the largest multi-character adventure game I can recall playing, but it's probably no bigger than Monkey Island 2. Bear in mind that game had 3 different islands you could jump between, and I don't think anyone would dream of calling that open world. Is it because there's a clear disconnect when travelling between islands versus being able to run through the entirety of Thimbleweed Park in more or less a straight line? Is it because of the multiple objectives the individual characters have to achieve versus Guybrush's singular goal of finding Big Whoop? I have no answer for this, by the way, I just found it interesting. Frankly, I think all this waffling of mine has left more questions than answers. One of the questions being, how did this turn out better than Broken Age? Because it did. Broken Age suffered in its second half in a way Thimbleweed Park does not. Possibly because Gilbert and Winnick appeared to have a game idea laid out before they started, something Double Fine didn't have, something I think they could have made clearer at the start, and something that ultimately hurt the project later on. Or maybe Gilbert was just watching from his office in Double Fine Studios at the time going, right, don't do that. Still glad that documentary exists though, always will be. Anyway, Thimbleweed Park. If you're an enthusiast of the genre, I think you'll get a lot out of this. It's got an old school sensibility about it while bringing some much needed changes to the formula, and it took me around 10 hours to get through. Surprisingly lengthy for a modern point and click. And yet it didn't really drag anywhere. Apart from when I was stuck. Again, this was on hard mode. I can't speak for the casual mode because I didn't really have time to go back and try it. If you're new to the genre, I would find a reviewer who has played it on casual. I don't think I'm the one to advise you here. For the rest of us, you can rest easy knowing these two still got it.
Don't you mean the 6th Amendment? Do you offer home delivery?
Why? You plan on moving here?
Not a chance. Nice chatting. Got a murder to solve.